Well, good evening, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to McDuff Lives. Well, it's kind of a whim today. I felt like I've been getting behind on my Mindfields. I've got a few ideas for shows that I've been wanting to do for some time, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go ahead and do a second show today. You folks remember that I used to do two shows a day, maybe 4 days a week, back in a couple years ago and found that I just needed to cut back for general exhaustion of the eyes and the brain. And so I've only been doing one lately, but felt like I was a little behind, and I really wanted to do this show about Michael Bloomberg and his genocidal British roots. One of these many times where I pick an executive intelligence review article from the past and read it. And my hope is that you guys will be able to have access to this information that you wouldn't run across this on your own. And even if you did, to actually read this article would take you some time. So I select the ones that I think are really worth it, and then I just read them to you, so you don't have to read it yourself. And you can sit back and listen, do something else while I'm reading to you, or even study it and think about taking some notes and doing some of that good old research yourselves after you get into some of this. Well, anyway, Michael Bloomberg is a character we've talked about many times on the show with George, with Andy, with David, many times with Bill Taylor, who will be my guest on Wednesday night, along with George. So we're going to have a do Wednesday night trio with George and Bill Taylor. So with that in mind, I thought, well, I really want to get this Bloomberg stuff out there so that folks can contemplate it in anticipation of our talk on Wednesday night with a couple of gentlemen that really have a lot to say about Michael Bloomberg and his roots. All right, without further ado, I'm going to change over to the screen with the text on it and see if we can't share it with you. All right, it's issue number EIR volume 35, number 21 of May 23rd, 2008. And the article is by Richard Freeman, who's a good friend who's been on my show many times. And Jeffrey Steinberg, who is one of the greatest EIR and LaRouche writers ever. And so I'm really glad to find stuff with these two gentlemen contributing. In December 2007, New York City's billionaire mayor and wannabe Mussolini of a fascist United States, Michael Bloomberg, delivered a keynote speech at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Bali, Indonesia. Bloomberg was there as the official spokesman for a little-known organization called the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives, ICLEI. Not surprisingly, Bloomberg delivered a Mussolini-esque diatribe about climate change and swore that the world's leading cities, not the sovereign governments, were going to take the lead in shoving the, quote, global warming swindle down the throats of the world's population at the expense of billions of innocent lives. Earlier in 2007, Bloomberg had hosted the second international 40, a coalition of the world's 40 largest cities promoting radical deindustrialization, cuts in energy consumption, and such looting schemes as traffic congestion fees and public-private partnership initiatives, under which taxpayer-funded core infrastructure like existing highways and water systems would be leased to private speculators to collect unchecked, spiraling tolls and fees. A month-long investigation by EIR has established that while Bloomberg has been put forward as one of the leading propagandists for a new Lombard League of feudal cities to replace the system of sovereign nation states and impose radical population reduction, i.e., genocide, Not a single one of these outright fascist ideas has originated with Bloomberg himself. He is the all too willing prop for a scheme coming directly from the top levels of the Anglo Dutch oligarchy through such agencies as the British Fabian Society, the Club of Rome, and the World Wildlife Fund, aka Worldwide Fund for Nature. Bloomberg made his City of London loyalties clear in his keynote address to the September 2007 annual conference of the British Conservative, that is, Tory party, in which he groveled, quote, "You forgive us for 1776, and we forgive you for 1812. American statesman Lyndon LaRouche commented at the time that if the founding fathers were alive today, they would have called for Bloomberg's execution for treason for those remarks. Bloomberg's Fabian roots are showing. Within weeks of his election as mayor in November 2001, Bloomberg received the first of many visits from London's deputy mayor, who is a leading figure in the radical environmental movement and the British Fabian Society. Nicolette "Nicky" Gavron has been, by all accounts, one of the most important British handlers of Bloomberg on behalf of the London oligarchy. It was Gavron, along with London's former mayor Ken Livingstone, who first imposed the congestion tax scheme and later sold it to Bloomberg. Bloomberg's entire scheme to turn the city into a depopulated, decentralized, deindustrialized feudal barony came from Gavron and the British Fabians. Under Bloomberg, New York has been fully integrated into the new Lombard League of city-states. For more than 20 years, up to 1987, Nicky Gavron was married to Robert Gavron, a multimillionaire fellow Fabian Society member and chairman of the Guardian Group, publisher of the London Guardian and The Observer, from 1997 to 2000. Lord Gavron is a central figure in the still ongoing pay for peerage scandal of former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Gavron donated £500,000 to the British Labour Party and, in turn, was granted a life peerage. As the chair of the London Planning Advisory Committee, in the 1990s, Nicky Gavron, according to a January 4, 2008 profile in The Guardian, quote, developed many of the initial strategies, including congestion charging, which allowed her and Livingstone to hit the ground running when they were elected in 2000. In her own testament to the Green Fascist scheme, Gavron told an audience at the Drum Major Institute in New York City on May 18, 2007, quote, "Now, just to put my cards on the table, for a decade in the 90s, as a local councillor, I became chair of the London Planning Advisory Committee. I don't know how many of you know, but we had no London government. That's what galvanized me into politics in 1986. Mrs. Thatcher abolished it. Can you imagine no city government in New York? Well, we had no government for 14 years. What we had was the Planning Advisory Committee. I commissioned much of the initial research and policy work on the London congestion charging scheme," she continued, "along with a whole lot of other things like high-density housing, open space, air quality, and so on. This included the outlying strategy for introducing a new congestion charge in 2003. Quote, we knew we had a Labour government under Tony Blair. By this time, we knew we were going to get a streamlined Greater London government called the Greater London Authority, and we knew we were going to get a directly elected executive mayor. I know you are used to it, you with all your strong mayors here, and a few weak mayors. You are used to this, but for us, it is a completely new brand of political leadership." She concluded, quote, "From very early on, many in the business community saw the value of the scheme, particularly London First, which is the nearest thing I think we have, not quite the same, not as powerful as your New York City partnership. Don't tell them I said that. London First backed our efforts straight away," unquote. Both the New York City Partnership and London First are advisory boards made up of the top financier and corporate leaders of the two cities who serve as the unofficial corporatist controllers of city government. The two groups significantly overlap, particularly through major financial institutions housed in New York and London. Indicative of the overlap between the two financier advisory bodies and official city business, London First advises that its subsidiary agency, Think London, is the official foreign direct investment arm of the City of London government. The New York City Partnership was founded by David Rockefeller, and Rockefeller Family Foundations are major funders of Bloomberg's radical deindustrialization and green agenda. Under the direction of Gavron and the Fabians, London established the London Plan and the London Climate Change Action Plan, which began to be implemented in 2004. Under the schemes, not only did London pioneer the congestion fees, taxes on all vehicles entering central London on weekdays, but also established low emission zones in which certain types of vehicles were banned altogether. The city is moving to decentralize and significantly cut energy consumption, and will do it through, quote, public-private partnerships, like the Energy Services Company being established as a prime provider of energy for the entire City of London. In Gavron's London plan, virtually all manufacturing in the city is to be eliminated. Indeed, instead, the state goal is to, quote, create and maintain an adequate infrastructural base of London's financial and business service sector as its chief engine of economic growth and jobs creation, unquote. Indeed, from 1973 to 2001, London lost 600,000 manufacturing jobs, and the toll continues to rise. One of the prime venues for the implementation of all these green fascist schemes was and is the British Fabian Society itself. On January 30th, 2006, Gavron chaired a Fabian Society environmental policy seminar, in which, according to the Society's website, she discussed, quote, the need for greater decentralization of energy provision and distribution, arguing that centralized generation of energy was hugely inefficient. Under Fabian Society impetus, London has been in the forefront of shutting down formerly industrial areas and turning them into permanent green zones, barred from any new development. Gavron and her Fabian colleagues have also made clear that nuclear power is absolutely forbidden. ICLEI and C40. The founding of the new Lombard League scheme goes back to 1989, when the collapse of the Soviet Empire revived, for some in London and on Wall Street, the fantasy of a single Anglo-American superpower to dominate the globe. It was during this period that a number of initiatives were launched aimed at destroying the nation-state system and imposing what Blair openly called a, quote, post-Westphalian one-world empire, to be imposed through permanent wars and other means of genocidal population reduction. It was also during this period that the Maastricht Treaty was imposed on Europe, particularly targeting a newly reunified Germany. That initiative by British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and her French poodle, President Francois Mitterrand, is now on the verge of being fully consolidated with the Lisbon Treaty that would, if ratified this year by all the European parliaments, create a single European superstate with a dictatorial regime in Brussels, thus eliminating all sovereign nations on the European continent west of Belarus. What Hitler did with tanks and bombers, the Anglo-Dutch intend to impose, this time through parliamentary diktat, without firing a shot. But the results will be even more genocidal. It was also at this time that the swindle of, quote, depleted ozone layers and greenhouse gases was first promoted as a direct assault against scientific and technological progress. In the lead up to the June 1992 Rio de Janeiro UN Conference on the Environment and Development, the Rio Conference, chaired by WWF leader and Al Gore's Green mentor, Maurice Strong, a meeting was convened at UN headquarters in New York City under the title Local Governments. Was out of this meeting, sponsored by Strong. ICLEI was born, according to Conrad Otto Zimmermann, the current ICLEI Secretary General. In a recent interview, Otto Zimmermann boasted that, apart from Strong's UNEP, the other key agency shaping ICLEI's agenda was the Genocidalist Club of Rome. Otto Zimmermann recounted his own personal contacts with Dr. Edward Prestel, a co-founder, along with Aurelio Peccei and Alexander King, of the Club of Rome in the late 1960s. The Club of Rome produced the infamous Limits to Growth report by Dennis Meadows and Jay Forrester, which revived the Malthusian argument for radical population reduction as the only cure for limits on food, energy, and other natural resources. Otto Zimmermann fully endorses the Club of Rome's anti-science Malthusian thesis and boasted in a recent interview that he had invited Meadows to deliver the keynote speech at a March 2007 ICLEI conference in Seville, Spain, quote, the 5th European Conference on Sustainable Cities and Towns, unquote. A strong antecedent to ICLEI, the International Union of Local Authorities, was founded in the Netherlands in 1913. One of the early leaders of IULA, Dick Hudig, was a fierce supporter and close ally of the Venetian Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, whose idea for a pan-European Union, a PEU of decentralized regions under one superstate, was an early 20th century expression of what now threatens to emerge under the Lisbon Treaty. Adolf Hitler's economic minister, Hjalmar Schacht, and Mussolini's Venetian banker, Giuseppe Volpe di Misurata, were both early activists in Coudenhove-Kalergi's overtly fascist PEU movement. Soon after its formal launching at the UN conference in September 1990, ICLEI spawned the Urban CO2 Reduction Project, which put more than 200 cities worldwide into the radical ecology camp in the run-up to the Rio conference. ICLEI now claims more than 800 member cities and towns. A key component of the Agenda 21 that came out of the Rio conference was the focus on local government leadership in the drive for green fascism worldwide, because it signaled the assault on the role of the nation-state system. As Otto Zimmermann boasted, the next decade of ICLEI's activities centered on driving the climate change swindle and meeting the goals set out at Rio. In 2002, ICLEI held a World Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, which Otto Zimmermann described, quote, we as ICLEI had organized a parallel local governments conference. At this session, we also reviewed what local governments had done in the past 10 years on Local Agenda 21. We also looked into the future and said what local governments local governments go for in the next 10 years. We determined basically that we don't have to change the goals or the course, but we have to accelerate implementation. Everything goes too slowly, and the global problems won't wait. He added that the pivotal role of local governments is due to the fact that national governments do not function and must increasingly be superseded by local action. He also confirmed that Sir Maurice Strong was a longtime advisory board member and that Al Gore has a close working relationship to Michelle Wiseman, the director of ICLEI USA. ICLEI is also closely allied with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the Gland, Switzerland-based, British-founded original post-World War II radical conservation organization. IUCN spun off the World Wildlife Fund. And to this day, WWF's international headquarters are housed in the IUCN's Gland, Switzerland building. IUCN was founded in 1948 by Sir Peter Scott and Sir Julian Huxley under the overt sponsorship of the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The founders freely admitted that the IUCN was actually a post-war revival of the eugenics movement, but that the crimes of Hitler had given eugenics a bad name. So, quote, conservation of nature, unquote, was adopted instead. The genocidal agenda of the worldwide environmental movement attests to that fact. According to Otto Zimmerman, ICLEI has forged a partnership with IUCN to peddle biodiversity and other murderous quack deindustrialization schemes under their common Countdown 2010 program. In July 2005, the Blair government hosted the G8 summit meeting at the Glen Eagles Hotel in Perthshire, Scotland. In tandem with the heads of state meeting, Nicky Gavron and others organized the first meeting of the C40. As Simon Reedy, a former leader of the radical environmentalist Greenpeace organization, now the executive director of C40, told a reporter recently, quote, in essence, it was Mayor Livingstone and Nicky Gavron's idea, and it came about simply because they felt whereas national governments were setting targets or not setting targets a few years ago, whatever happens, cities were the ones that had to deliver. Mainly because cities are responsible for 70 to 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. Rather than wait for national governments to make decisions, why don't the cities get together and start taking action themselves to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? The idea was generated in 2004, and the first C20 and later expanded to C40 meeting took place in London in 2005 around the time of the G8 meeting. By 2006, the membership had been expanded to 40 of the world's largest cities, all with populations above 3 million people. Nicky Gavron has met with Mayor Bloomberg at least 7 times and was a leading figure in the second C40 event hosted by Bloomberg in New York, May 14th to 17th. Pardon me a moment. All right, halfway through. And see, hello to folks. For Free Range here, Melissa's Mind is here. And Prester John, hello. Hello, Laura, All the Sun. Rick Olson is here. Oh, it's good to have you guys. Thanks for checking in, and thanks wherever you are. If you're on the Rumble chat, thanks for being with me tonight. And if you're watching this later, thanks for paying attention to it. As you see, we're getting into the Michael Bloomberg part now, but I thought that foundation was really, really worthwhile to just start thinking about, isn't that what Rahm Emanuel is all about with Chicago and everything? And the idea of breaking down the sovereignty of the United States and then turning it into regions that are controlled by major cities. And that, again, is what they refer to as the new Lombard League, which is a return to a fascist, what we call now fascist, what was then called feudal system, which people are serfs and, you are subject to the power of that financial arm that is controlling everything from the center of that city. And isn't it good to have the connection between the Fabians and Michael Bloomberg spelled out? So that's going to be more clear as we read the rest of the article. NSSM 200, and you all are familiar with that, right? The food policy of gone green/brown. Self-proclaimed British agent Henry Kissinger set forth the Anglo-Dutch Malthusian agenda as official U.S. national security party policy with his early 1970s infamous NSSM 200 doctrine, which targeted third world countries for radical population reduction to preserve their raw material wealth for the Anglo-Dutch oligarchy. An even more overtly genocidal version of that doctrine is being peddled today through the drive to eliminate the nation state system altogether and replace it with a world empire organized around city state feudal baronies ruled by green/brown fascist ideas. Were such a scheme to be actually implemented, it would only succeed in triggering a new dark age like the 14th century nightmare that wiped out half the parishes of Europe through the Black Death, starvation, and the total breakdown of social order that lasted for generations. To achieve this, H.G. Wells' nightmare, the United States must be captured, and the leading Eurasian nations, Russia, China, and India, must be crushed. Lord Ronald Oxburgh, a leading figure in the climate group and the Carbon Swap Fund, Climate Change Capital, and a former CEO of Royal Dutch Shell, emphasized this point in a recent interview. Oxburgh warned, quote, some of the biggest problems in pushing through the carbon swap and other global warming dictatorial deindustrialization schemes, quote, are actually in the so-called BRIC, the BRIC, Brazil, India, Russia, China, and you can add to this, in other words, those countries that were developing countries, but whose economies have taken off and who are now eager to join the developed world. And as that improvement in standard of living increases, the demand for energy is enormous. It is this London-driven genocidal apparatus that has steered Michael Bloomberg from the moment he was sworn in as mayor of New York City and even earlier. Those same circles still consider Bloomberg to be their top choice for high office in Washington, perhaps as president or vice president, if their schemes succeed. Well, that's it. I thought I had another 2 pages to go, but that's the whole article. I think it's important that we consider that connection between the fascists, the Fabians and Michael Bloomberg, because of, just the situation of Bloomberg there as New York gets gutted, the, the effect of the lockdowns and everything else is to, drive business and everything else out of the city. And the United States is being denuded of industrial uh, productive power in the first place. So, anyway, I thought that this was really worth sharing tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you tomorrow morning, 11 a.m., with Yuri Rashka, the journalist and former member of parliament from Moldova, who's been writing some very interesting articles lately about Russia and and Europe and the United States. So I'll see you in the morning. Thanks for joining me tonight. Good night.